The small diner smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread as the morning sun slipped through the windows. The sound of clinking plates and soft chatter filled the room. Among the busy tables, a young waitress moved quickly, carrying trays with practiced ease. Her apron was slightly worn. Her shoes had seen better days, but her smile never faded. She greeted each customer with the same warmth. Whether they ordered a big breakfast or just a single cup of coffee. Life had never been easy for her. She worked long hours, sometimes double shifts, just to keep her little apartment and help her family with bills. Still, she carried herself with quiet strength. She wasn't the type to complain. Even when her feet ached or her back hurt from standing all day, she would straighten up, put on her best smile, and keep serving. Customers often said she had a calming presence, like sunshine in a small place where people came and went in a hurry. On this particular morning, something unusual happened. A man walked in, dressed in a sharp suit that caught the attention of everyone nearby. His watch gleamed, and the polished shoes he wore looked like they had never touched dirt. People whispered softly as he sat at a corner table. He had an air of confidence about him, the kind that only comes from someone who has more than enough money and doesn't need to prove it. The waitress noticed but didn't treat him any differently. She approached with her notepad in hand and the same gentle smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and kind. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" The man nodded and ordered his coffee. She brought it to him quickly, setting the cup down without spilling a drop. He thanked her briefly, but his eyes studied her in a way she didn't fully understand. To her, he was just another customer, and she had dozens of tables to manage. She hurried back to the counter to pick up another order, balancing plates carefully while still managing to wave at a child across the room, who smiled back at her. The wealthy man sat quietly, observing her. He noticed the way she spoke to the elderly couple at the next table, listening with patience as they took longer than usual to decide on their order. He noticed how she bent down to help a little boy who had dropped his spoon, and how she laughed softly to make him feel better. None of it seemed forced. She wasn't pretending to be kind, she simply was. When the man finally placed his order, she treated him the same way. She listened, repeated it back to make sure she got it right, and then hurried off to the kitchen. A short while later, she returned with his meal, setting it down neatly in front of him. "Here you go," she said, still wearing that soft smile. "Let me know if you need anything else." He ate in silence while the diner continued to buzz with life. The waitress moved from table to table, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, and exchanging short conversations. To her, it was just another busy day, but to him, it was something more. When he finished his meal, he asked for the check. She brought it promptly, placing it on the edge of the table with a polite nod. "Take your time," she said before stepping away to tend to another customer. The man slipped a few bills onto the table. To anyone else, it might have looked like a normal tip. But when the waitress returned, she saw only a single dollar left beside the receipt. For a moment, her heart sank. A man dressed like that, someone who clearly had wealth, had left only $1. She could have rolled her eyes. She could have sighed in disappointment. She could have muttered under her breath about the unfairness of it all. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up the dollar, tucked it into her apron, and whispered softly, almost as if to herself, "Every dollar counts." Then she looked at the man and gave him a genuine smile. "Thank you for coming in today," she said kindly. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." There was no sarcasm in her voice, no bitterness in her tone. She simply meant it. Her day would go on, and she would continue serving the next person with the same energy and care. To her, being grateful for even the smallest things was not a weakness. It was a choice she had made long ago, a choice that kept her strong even when life wasn't fair. The wealthy man stared at her for a moment, almost puzzled by her reaction. He had expected something different, maybe anger, maybe disappointment. Instead, He saw someone who carried grace in a world where it was often missing. The diner grew busier as more customers arrived, and the waitress hurried off to help them. She didn't think twice about the dollar tip. To her, it was just another part of the job. But for the man sitting at the corner table, it was the beginning of something he would never forget. The diner stayed busy as the waitress carried on with her work, balancing trays, refilling coffee cups, and exchanging smiles with customers. She didn't think much about the dollar tip left behind by the wealthy man. For her, it was another small piece in a long day of endless movement. But the man hadn't left yet. He remained seated in the corner, his sharp eyes following her every step. He noticed how she didn't linger on the disappointment. Many people would have frowned. Some might have whispered complaints to coworkers, and a few might have even confronted him. But she hadn't done any of those things. She had simply tucked the dollar into her apron and continued her shift as if nothing unusual had happened. That small act told him more than any conversation ever could. The waitress went to the next table, where an older gentleman sat alone with a newspaper. She poured his coffee and asked gently, "How's your morning going?" Her voice was genuine, and she leaned in slightly to hear him better over the noise. The man smiled back, telling her about his day, and she listened with interest, even though she was clearly busy. From his corner, the wealthy man took another sip of his drink. He wasn't really thirsty anymore. He was waiting, observing, almost testing her without her knowing it. The way she treated that older man was no different from the way she had treated him. No favoritism. No difference between the rich and the ordinary. Later, she noticed a young mother struggling with two children, one crying loudly while the other pushed food around on the plate. Without hesitation, the waitress hurried over, crouched down to the little boy's level, and asked him if he wanted a fresh spoon to play with. She distracted him with a smile, making him laugh for a moment, while also helping the mother settle down. It wasn't part of her job, but she did it anyway because she cared. The wealthy man leaned back in his chair. He had tested many people before, but this was different. He wanted to see how she responded when life gave her less than she deserved. And her response had been remarkable. Meanwhile, she returned to his table to check on him. "Would you like a refill on your coffee?" She asked politely, still carrying that same warmth. "No, thank you," he replied, studying her expression. She nodded and smiled, clearing his empty plate quickly. She didn't mention the tip, didn't show any hint of disappointment. To her, it seemed almost natural to move on with grace as she walked away again. A coworker whispered something near the counter, glancing at the wealthy man's table. Did he really leave just $1? The coworker asked in a low voice. The waitress gave a small shrug. "It's okay. Every bit helps." Maybe that's all he could leave today. The coworker looked surprised, but the waitress didn't dwell on it. She grabbed another tray and hurried to the back. The man's eyes followed her again. Inside, something shifted. He had been expecting annoyance, maybe even sarcasm, but instead, he had found gratitude. Her words reached him. "Every bit helps." They stayed in his mind long after she walked away. The waitress returned once more to his table, her voice calm as ever. "Thank you again for coming in today," she said kindly. "We really appreciate your visit." She meant it. There was no trace of bitterness, just sincerity. The wealthy man paused, staring at her as if trying to read the truth in her face. But there was nothing hidden. Her kindness was genuine. He found himself strangely moved, something he hadn't expected when he walked into the diner that morning. That other customers laughed, children cried, plates clattered, but his focus stayed locked on her. She didn't know it yet, but her choice to respond with gratitude to something so small had already started to change the course of her life. When she left his table for the final time, the man sat still for a while. He tapped his fingers on the edge of the table, lost in thought. This wasn't just about a tip anymore. It was about character. He realized that while he had walked in wearing wealth on his sleeve, It was she who carried the kind of richness money couldn't buy. The waitress, unaware of his thoughts, continued to serve others. She laughed softly with the older couple, refilled another coffee, and tied her apron tighter as the lunch crowd began to arrive. For her, it was simply another day of hard work. For him, it was something much more important. As he finally stood up to leave, he looked back at her one last time. She didn't notice. She was busy clearing a table for the next family. But he left the diner with something heavy on his mind. He had seen hundreds of waiters and waitresses in his life, but this one had shown him something rare, the ability to accept little with the same grace as if it were a fortune. What she didn't know was that the dollar bill she tucked away so casually was not the end of their encounter. It was only the beginning. The wealthy man stepped outside the diner for a brief moment, the sound of traffic rushing by, but something made him pause at the door. He could have left, gone back to his world of meetings, business calls, and polished office buildings. But he didn't. Instead, he turned and looked through the glass window once more. Inside, the waitress was still working, still smiling, still giving her best to every single person who came through the door. He walked back inside and returned to his table. Nobody seemed to notice, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. He watched as she carried plates that looked too heavy for someone her size, yet she did it without complaint. He saw the way she bent down to speak softly to a crying child, and the way she laughed with an older woman who had been coming to the diner for years. Every move she made seemed to carry patience and warmth, something he rarely saw in his world of fast deals and sharp business minds. The waitress finally noticed he was still there. She walked over, surprised but not bothered. "Would you like anything else?" she asked kindly. He shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine," but he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. There was something about her that intrigued him, something that kept pulling him to stay. The waitress nodded politely and turned to another table, where two teenagers were laughing loudly over milkshakes. She didn't scold them for being noisy. She simply smiled and asked if they needed refills. They nodded eagerly, and she brought them more, treating them with the same respect she gave to everyone else. The wealthy man thought about the dollar he had left on the table earlier. It hadn't been an accident. He had wanted to see her reaction. For years he had lived in a world where money spoke louder than words, where people treated him differently the moment they learned who he was or how much he had. Many smiled at him, but not out of kindness, out of interest. Many thanked him, but not because they truly cared, because they wanted more from him. He had grown tired of it, tired of wondering if kindness was ever genuine anymore. That day, he had decided to try something simple. He wanted to see what would happen if he gave little instead of much. Would the person serving him change their face? Would their tone turn sharp? Or would they still show kindness, even when the reward was small? And here she was, the waitress who had thanked him as if he had handed her $100. She had said, "Every dollar counts," and he couldn't get the words out of his head. The lunch rush grew heavier, but her energy didn't fade. She moved faster, yet never rushed her kindness. She was gentle with every plate, careful with every word. To her, each customer was worth the same attention. Finally, when she came back near his table again, he spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "Do you always treat people this way?" She stopped, holding a tray against her hip, a little surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "Like this," he said. "You're kind, even when people aren't." She gave a small smile, the kind that came from deep within. "I don't know how to be any other way," she replied. "Everyone has their struggles. Sometimes the only good part of their day is how someone treats them." Her words struck him harder than he expected. She didn't know who he was, didn't know the world he came from, and yet she had said something that felt like truth. The wealthy man leaned forward slightly. "And you didn't mind the tip?" She shook her head gently. $1 is still something. Maybe that's what someone could give. I'm just thankful for it. He stared at her for a long moment, and she, feeling the weight of his gaze, excused herself to continue working. She didn't dwell on the conversation. To her, it was just another exchange with a customer, but to him, it was much more. He realized that what he had just witnessed was rare, real humility, real gratitude, something he hadn't seen in years. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people who measured value by numbers, by what someone could give or take. Yet here was a woman who saw value in something as small as a single dollar dot. As the afternoon went on, the diner began to quiet down. Customers left, the noise faded, and the waitress finally took a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, rubbing her tired hands together, unaware that the wealthy man was still watching her closely. He tapped his fingers on the table, deep in thought. Something inside him told him that he couldn't just walk away and forget this moment. He had tested her, and she had passed in a way he hadn't expected. Now he felt the need to reveal himself, to let her know who he really was and why he had done what he did. For the waitress, it was just another day. For the wealthy man, it was the beginning of a decision that would change her life forever. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked slowly toward the counter where she stood. She looked up at him with the same gentle smile she had given all day, not knowing that her life was about to take a turn she never imagined. The diner had quieted down. The rush was over, and only a few customers lingered at their tables, sipping coffee or finishing their meals slowly. The waitress stood behind the counter, jotting down notes for the next shift, her hair slightly messy from hours of nonstop work. She rubbed her tired wrist but kept her posture steady, ready to serve the next person who might walk through the door. The wealthy man approached her calmly. His polished shoes tapped lightly on the tiled floor, but she didn't sense the weight of his presence until he stood right across from her. She looked up and offered the same smile she had given him earlier. "Is there something else I can get you?" She asked kindly, her voice soft but professional. He studied her face for a long moment before answering. His expression was different now, less guarded, more thoughtful. "I wanted to ask you something," he said quietly. She tilted her head slightly. "Sure." He placed both hands on the counter, leaning forward just enough that his words wouldn't carry across the room. "Do you know who I am?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked, unsure of how to respond. "You're a customer," she said simply. "That's all I need to know." Her answer seemed to both surprise and impress him. Most people would have tried to guess. Some might have looked for hints in his watch, his suit, his car parked outside. But she hadn't. To her, he was just another person in the diner, no different from anyone else. The man let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "That's exactly what I thought you'd say." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I'm not just a customer. I own several businesses in this city. I've spent years building them, and I've met countless people along the way. But do you know what I've learned? Money changes how people see you. Most smiles I get aren't real. Most kindness I see is only because of what I can give in return." The waitress listened quietly, not sure where this was going. Her eyes stayed steady on his, respectful but calm. "This morning," he went on, "I wanted to test something. I wanted to see how someone would treat me if I gave them almost nothing in return. That's why I left you just $1. At last, the truth was spoken. The waitress's heart gave a small jolt. She had wondered about it earlier, but she hadn't allowed the thought to stay in her mind. Now she understood it hadn't been carelessness or stinginess. It had been deliberate. Still, she didn't flinch or change her expression. She simply nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. "I see," she said softly. The wealthy man's gaze grew sharper, but not in a harsh way. "And do you know what you did? You thanked me. You didn't roll your eyes, you didn't complain, you didn't even sigh. You just smiled and said every dollar counts." He paused, his voice softer now. Do you realize how rare that is? Her cheeks grew warm, though she didn't fully understand why he was telling her this. To her, being grateful for even a little wasn't extraordinary. It was just how she had always lived. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, she said gently. I've learned that if you only value the big things, you'll miss the small blessings that keep you going. $1 might not mean much to some, but to me, it can still help. And kindness doesn't cost anything. Her words landed like quiet thunder. The wealthy man stood still, letting the silence stretch between them. He realized this woman wasn't acting, wasn't performing. She truly believed what she was saying. Finally, he spoke again, his tone more personal. I've been searching for people like you. People who don't measure everything by money. People with character, humility, and heart. It's rare. Rarer than you know. The waitress looked down briefly, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to anyone praising her for something so simple. She worked hard every day, not because she wanted recognition, but because she had no choice. It was survival. Yet she had chosen to carry herself with grace through it all. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card, sliding it across the counter toward her. The card was simple but elegant, with his name printed boldly in the center and the name of his company underneath. She glanced at it, then back at him, unsure of what it meant. I'd like to talk to you more, he said firmly. Not as a customer and waitress, but as someone who sees potential in you. I don't usually do this, but something about the way you handled today tells me you're different. She hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was just supposed to be another shift, another day of hard work, but it was turning into something much bigger. The wealthy man smiled slightly, seeing her uncertainty. Don't worry. I'm not asking for anything. Just think of it as an open door. You've earned it, not because of what you did, but because of who you are. For the first time all day, the waitress felt her composure crack a little. Her throat tightened, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness. Thank you, she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The man gave a small nod. No, he said softly. Thank you for reminding me what real kindness looks like. With that, he straightened his jacket and walked toward the door. The waitress stood frozen, the card still resting in her hand, her heart racing with a mix of disbelief and hope. She had no idea what might come next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was no longer the same. The diner's door closed behind the wealthy man, leaving the waitress standing at the counter with his card in her hand. For a moment, the world around her seemed to quiet. She looked down at the small piece of paper, running her finger across the letters of his name. It felt strange, almost unreal, that someone like him had taken notice of someone like her. Her shift went on as usual. More customers came in, and she kept working, though her thoughts kept drifting back to what had just happened. Every time she slipped her hand into her apron pocket, she felt the edge of the business card pressing against her palm, reminding her that this wasn't a dream. That night, when she returned to her tiny apartment, she sat down at the kitchen table and placed the card in front of her. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She thought about her lifelong hours, constant bills, and the endless effort just to keep going. She had never expected miracles. She only knew how to work hard and stay kind. And now, somehow, kindness had opened a door she didn't even know existed. The next morning, she stared at the card again before finally gathering the courage to make a call. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. A professional voice answered, and within minutes she was scheduled to meet with the man at his office. Walking into his building felt like stepping into another world. The glass walls, the polished floors, the quiet hum of important conversations. It was all so different from the small diner where she spent her days. When she was shown into his office, he greeted her warmly, no longer the stranger in the corner booth, but a man who wanted her to feel comfortable. "I'm glad you came," he said with a genuine smile. "I meant every word I said yesterday. People like you are rare. You don't just serve food, you serve people. You lift them up with your presence. And I want people like that around me." She listened carefully, unsure of where this was leading. He leaned forward. "I'd like to offer you a job. Not waiting tables. Something more stable, with better pay and benefits. I believe you'd thrive in an environment where your kindness and work ethic could truly shine. And if you'd rather study or pursue another dream, I'd be happy to help with that too." Her eyes widened. She had never imagined such words would be spoken to her. She thought of the long nights she had spent worrying about rent, about groceries, about her family. And now, sitting across from a man who could change all of that, she felt her chest tighten with emotion. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just say yes," he replied softly. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time she didn't hide them. They slid down her cheeks as she nodded. Yes, in that moment, something shifted. The life she had known, the endless cycle of struggle, was beginning to change. Not because she had begged for help, not because she had tried to impress someone powerful, but because she had chosen to remain kind even when life gave her very little. Over the weeks that followed, her life transformed. She moved into a steadier job with hours that allowed her to rest and spend time with her loved ones. Her paychecks covered more than just survival. They gave her hope for the future. She even began saving for things she had once thought impossible. But more than the material changes, what stayed with her was the lesson. One small act of humility, one sincere thank you for a single dollar, had set everything in motion. She often thought back to that day in the diner, the moment she had chosen gratitude over bitterness. It had seemed so small at the time, yet it had changed her world. As for the wealthy man, he never forgot her either. Whenever he saw her smile, he was reminded of the truth he had almost forgotten in his own world of wealth, that the value of a person is not measured by money, but by character. The story of the waitress and the $1 tip spread quietly, told by those who had witnessed parts of it, whispered as a reminder of how life can turn in unexpected ways. Some called it luck, others called it fate, but for her, it was simple. Kindness had been her greatest strength, and it had finally come back to her. She still worked hard, still carried herself with the same grace she always had. But now, she did it with a lighter heart, knowing that even in the smallest actions, even in the humblest choices, life could shift in ways she never imagined. Her life had indeed changed forever, not because of a fortune handed to her, but because she had proven that true richness lies in the heart. And sometimes it only takes a single dollar to reveal it.